Yo people, welcome to the HTML lesson 3 of what we need to create a web page using HTML and Crave coding. In this video, we'll download, install and use a software that will make coding in HTML easier. This software is called an IDE, which is a shortcut of Integrated Development Environment. And that is a software for building applications that combines common developer tools into a single graphical user interface. Now, all you need to know is that an IDE makes web development easier. People previously were using the Notepad, which exists in your PC by default. Notepad is not a good code editor because it wasn't designed to be one. And that's why you need to download some IDE. You can find plenty of good free IDEs that can help you improve your development skills. For example, there is Notepad++, Sublime Text 3, Visual Studio Code, Atom, etc. As you just heard, there are a lot of IDEs, but I'm gonna download Visual Studio Code, a sophisticated text editor for code markup and prose, which will be simple for beginners to use. Not just Visual Studio, but Visual Studio Code, or you can also say VS Code. I highly recommend you to use VS Code, but if you want to use another editor, then it's up to you. It's not gonna be that big of an issue if you're familiar with your editor. So let's get started. Alright, all you have to do is just Google download VS Code and then enter the first link in Google. Otherwise, you'll find the link in the description below. Now, these are the links that are responsible for downloading VS Code. I have Windows, so I will choose to download VS Code for Windows, of course. And let's wait a bit for the download. Now, after the download is done, let's install our software. Let's click Run. You have to accept the agreement. Next. Also check this if you want to create a desktop icon. And install. Now let's wait for it. And now let's click Finish and launch our Visual Studio Code. And this is VS Code, the editor we were just downloading. So now we're gonna create our very first web page using HTML. Let's go to File and New File. Now web browsers can display a lot of different documents. It's not just HTML. They can display SVG files, XML files. So the very first thing, we need to tell the browser what type of file this is. And we do that by using the doctype declaration, and so let's go ahead and type in doctype HTML. And we put an exclamation point here, and here we are. It's that simple. So the browser moves a top-down manner, so it'll hit this first and it'll realize that this is HTML. And that's the language it's gonna use to render the web page. Now, it used to be in previous versions of HTML such as 4.01, you actually had to type out the version here, 4.01. And while that might not seem a huge pain, it becomes a pain if you have hundreds of web pages. Every time there was a new version, you had to go right here and put a new version in. And that became a real pain. So somebody came in with a brilliant idea that if you put HTML there, it'll load the most current version. And the current version is 5. So yes, we're gonna be using HTML5. And what's nice about this is if an HTML6 or HTML7 or 8 comes out in the future, you won't have to change this. You'll be using the very current version of HTML just like we are right now. We're gonna be using the current version, and if there is another version in the future, we won't have any problem with that. Now the very first thing that comes after the doctype declaration is the HTML element, and we create that by typing HTML. And if you remember from the previous video, this is the opening tag, and we need a closing tag. In the last video, I forgot to tell you this, but in the closing tag, we need to put the slash right here. Now this really is not a section of our HTML document, it's more like a wrapper, and that is everything in our document will go between this HTML element, between the opening tag and the closing tag. It's more like a starting and ending point that tells the browser where the HTML starts and where the HTML ends. Let's put some space in here. Okay, now the first section that comes after HTML is called the head section. So we need a head tag, and we need a closing one. Now this is not a huge section that you need to be concerned about. We'll be using this section a little bit more in the future. Now the section contains a lot of information about the page itself, and so this is stuff like the title of the page. That's actually the only thing that you can really display here is the title of the page that goes in the top menu, and also can be used to identify the language of the web page, like if it's in French or Arabic, English, and so on. Now there are also some other areas, but we don't need to worry about right now because we will get to them later. And again, the title element is what shows up in the title bar of the web browser. So let's create our title, and we're gonna go ahead and just say my web page. And then yes, we need a closing tag. So that's all we need to be concerned about right now, and let's move on to the body section. And this is where all the action takes place. This is really the heart and soul of your web page. Everything inside this element is shown in your web page, and it needs also closing tag as well. Now inside this body section, let's create a heading h1 element and name it lunch meal. Also this is the closing tag, and under the h1 element let's create a paragraph, create element, and say something stupid in it such as who's ready for lunch. And now let's make a bit smaller heading, which is h2, and name it watermelon. Then let's create a paragraph and write in it, it's time for watermelon, who doesn't like it? Now you need to tell your computer, okay, this is an HTML file. How to do that? Well, you have to save the document with the type HTML or HTML. And to do that, we need to click on File, Save, Now we choose where to save this file. I want to name it my web page. And of course, don't forget the .html extension. Now let's save the file and go for the desktop to open the file. Okay, this is the web file we have just created. Let's open it. And there we are. We finally have our first web page. And now, as you see right here, this is the heading H1 element, launch mail. And this is the first paragraph. And this is the H2 element, watermelon. And this is the last paragraph. As you have noticed, H1 and H2 are bold and a bit larger than paragraph. That's it for today's lesson. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to get tuned for more updates.